Good day to you. This is Anna Galactic bringing you the formal Unimetrics series. This is June 1st, 2024 from Chico, California. What we'll be doing in this first episode is giving a brief summary based on a new geometry which supersedes that of Euclid and excels that of Einstein, who is responsible for the formulation of the current definition of space. The focus of attention, a lot of the work has already been done. The 2,000 years approximately of linear algebra history has certainly not been wasted time. We were blueprinted as a race to perceive the universe in a linear fashion. One example of a way you can prove that to yourself is the realization that your two eyes are set in the front of your head, and that enables depth perception on a parallax. That is trigonometry. So we're actually programmed by DNA, by the great designer, whom we will not be referring to except by that name. That is the scientific name for what humans call God, either in hatred or in defiance, or in abnegation, or in love, or in devotion. It makes no difference. It's out of place in science, because God cannot be defined. However, there is a superposition between God and what science knows about reality. We do have a consciousness. This is, to jump ahead a little bit, we want to focus now, pardon the pun, but we do want to focus on our linear programming. This is blueprinted by DNA, which is inalterable. It would have to be inalterable in order for the species, of whom it could be said in an abstract sense that man is a species in the sense that he's a cellular organism, obeying the principles of DNA transmission. Now, we are programmed to see linearly, and we have brains with minds that are capable of abstracting linear space. This was accomplished, you could say, by the Greeks, although it goes before the Greeks, of course. The history of how mankind arrived at a scientific perception of the world is lost to us. Science cannot penetrate back through the mists of time to discern our specific origin on this earth, although science does have an educated hypothesis of where humans came from. We should begin there because of the plenary nature, that is, the full scope of physics, does exist not in a vacuum. Our minds are not separate from the rest of us, that is, the rest of our blueprinting. And I have rather logically, I think, simplistically, abstractly, but logically in a dichotomy, shown that we have two subsystems. This is disregarding our innate automatic processes which regulate our digestive, circulatory, and pulmonary system. We are automatic creatures. We were definitely designed to function in an incredibly complex way. It's rather absurd to even think in any other terms other than design, and that can be proved logically. So, in our exposure to the notion of God, this would be through some standardized religion or just direct perception of the beauty of creation, obviously indicates a design. But it is much more logical than that. In other words, this is rigorous. We can prove that there is a kind of God, that is, an entity, that makes perfect logical sense and is in fact inescapable. One reason for this perception is the clear perception that we have that the Earth was not always in the universe. It is considered to be approximately 4 billion years old. How long life has existed on Earth is a matter of debate, which we need not get into, because we can take a strictly logical approach to delimit at least the parameters of the question. That is, where does the Earth come from? Well, we leave that open. But on Earth, where did the ecology come from? This would be what we call life, cellular life. When is the real question? When did life appear on Earth? According to the current model, that goes back on the order of 1 billion years. But again, that is not strictly speaking what we need to know. What we're homing in on is, where did man come from with his incredible logic system, which enables science. The origin of science would go back to the origin of humans. It can be proved since the discovery of DNA and the characteristic of DNA that it's absolutely locked. It cannot be changed. There's no such thing as genetic mutation. There's a footnote to that the industrial geneticists employed by evil governments are pursuing with all of their evil mind, heart, and soul. This is a group mind, seeking, of course, what group minds seek. In the case of governments, this is not something that should be discussed with children listening, because they could be traumatized by the evil nature of human beings, humanity in the group sense. So there is a secondary question that has a moral implication. It's not just where did man's mind come from, but where did the glitch come from? Religions worldwide uniformly attempt to address both questions in terms of supernatural beings. Probably the simplest formulation is the dichotomy of a good creator and some evil, malefic supernatural being somewhere between the level of mankind and, you would have to say, the creator. Now, the creator, for those of you who do have a religious background, do not ever worry about the fact that you have a religious side. It's not against science at all. They overlap because they're superpositional in any individual human being. When they overlap in the group mind of man, I'm talking about governments, just organized religions, anywhere where there's a governing body of men, within one generation that becomes corrupted as if by a virus. It carries on a life of its own. The governments of the world prove that. So we're dealing with something that's irrational. We need to disregard that, but you as an individual and I as an individual cannot disregard it at all in our own individual lives. It is not, strictly speaking, the province of science. However, science addresses every single aspect of life. There are some aspects of consciousness and morality that science is not allowed to give pronunciamentos on, because science is based on proof. Nothing about God can be proved. However, in the superposition of that concept of God with what can be proved, we do have a definite name for what otherwise would be called God. And so whenever you wish, you are certainly permitted to refer to that being. That being is definitely a logical construction of the human mind. We do not invent the Creator. We do tend to invent God because God would have characteristics that we project. It's called anthropomorphism, I believe. It's not a serious issue because if men were perfectly rational, they would be able to distinguish between religious argumentation, which is never final, and scientific argumentation, which by definition must be final. Now, when you're dealing with science as it's projected by any group mind, such as the body of physicists or biologists, you will definitely be led astray, because those bodies of men are already under the control of a group mind, because more than one generation has passed since the inception of the models that they all seek, not necessarily strictly part of science, but the solutions that human beings seek from science are pressured out of science by a certain, you could say, a natural process, because we look to our scientists for rationality. Don't. You don't want to look to your scientists for rationality, because they themselves do not. They're only pursuing money. They want to survive, and they have a very, very good avenue of survival open at the compassionate, loving attention of the governments, who are just devoted to their citizens in order to improve their lives altruistically. You know, I'm speaking totally sarcastically. Governments don't have a conscience. They can't. There's nothing to control the group mind. There's no feedback system after a while. You see that now in physics. The models that are produced in order to compensate for lack of insight into our origins are inevitably going to be corrupted by the attention of the government, the group mind, in order to do what it wants to do, what the group mind wants to do, which is irrational, and it's not strictly speaking a mind, unless you believe in Satan. The existence of Satan could be said to be of the same order as that of God, only a step down. The right way to conceptualize the possible or hypothetical existence of a malefic supernatural being can be extrapolated from essentially non-provable perceptions. We do have a perception of evil, total irrationality on the surface of the earth, no controls over governments who execute wars. They begin wars. There's been a constant state of warfare that persists to this day. Genocide is going on right under the noses of the United Nations, another group mind which cannot be trusted at all. In fact, the United Nations was invented explicitly, as can be proved from historical science. The United Nations was invented by the Soviet Union under the control of the Zionists at the time, and it was approved in New York by the Zionists there. And at the tail end of World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Joseph Jugashvili Stalin met in Yalta and ratified together, that is, the communists and the free world got together using these two men in Yalta to come up with the idea of the United Nations in order to complete the Zionist plan. So the United Nations was formulated for only one reason, and rationally speaking, realistically speaking, the United Nations only had one purpose. It has no purpose now. That was proved in January of this year, when the nation of South Africa, which had undergone apartheid and was well aware of the horrific situation that the Palestinians faced, being exterminated by the genocidal Zionists, South Africa submitted a suit to the International Court of Justice, which is an arm of the United Nations, and Israel was found guilty. In a preliminary judgment, it wasn't to say that they were committing genocide, which everyone knows they are, but it was forced out against actually pretty rational prediction that the International Court of Justice would simply say that Israel is innocent. They did not say that, and it surprised the shit out of the top experts on the Palestinian situation, including Norman Finkelstein himself, who I found out does actually pronounce it Finkelstein, which is fine. I mean, it's just a personal decision. But we do know that there is an evil force at work. Well, it's in Israel, at least. It certainly is in New York or Washington, D.C., or wherever you picture the free world, so-called, and totally not only powerless to stop Israel, but actually supports Israel. And really, the whole world, in the sense of power, the power loci of the earth are unanimous in supporting Israel. Just kill all the Palestinians so the Jews will be safe. Now, the logical result of that is already obvious. It's already happening. The United States is now fully committed, under the orders of Jerusalem, to attack Iran. Israel is incapable of attacking Iran unilaterally. Iran is just a little bit too strong. It would be taking way too big a chance. Israel does not have that many people. But the United States has a lot of every kind of people, including Zionists, who do control this country. That's well known. If you're not aware of that, or that somehow goes against your ethic, well, then you need to grow up, darling, because this world is coming to a pretty quick conclusion. How quickly, no one can say. I have endeavored to give some kind of gross timeline. All you can say is it won't be long now, because once Iran comes under attack, that's going to be it. There won't be anything much after that. And again, that's already been done. It's already signed, sealed, and delivered. United States is gearing up for an invasion of Iran that will end this Earth age. So you might be discouraged from pursuing your blueprinted course to get the answers that you need from the universe in order to complete your life so that you're a satisfied, satisfactory human being who after death you might actually go on to another level. Now again, that's religion, and we really can't scientifically explore that except with one very obvious virtual tautology, that since you have consciousness now, it can be stated and supported that since human beings have consciousness now, if indeed this is a logical creation that has some kind of goal, then the consciousnesses, all 16 billion of them, half of whom are in the grave right now, those consciousnesses must persist somehow. Science cannot say how. We really don't have any data, except one small case. There is this one strange circumstance that's well known. The Islam people totally understand and accept it. The Christians supposedly understand it. They say that they understand it. The Jews definitely understand it and deny it. And that is the life and mission of the one seed. This would be due to the personal intervention of the Creator to complete His plan for the earth. But if you want to know the whole story of how that went afoul, and how that plan actually failed, you can read the Bible. Such that the healer of the earth, the man who is given supernatural power to heal, and who was definitely capable of healing the entire earth with all of its population, he was murdered by his own people, who ever since have based their entire existence, pseudo-religiously, philosophically, and otherwise, certainly in a practical sense, they absolutely detest the very memory of that man, because his very existence indicts their whole race. They consider themselves to be a race. That may have been true at one time under the guidance of the superconsciousness who had selected them to produce Yeshua. They obviously failed in their part of the bargain. And now they're undergoing, or they have undergone for 2,000 years, the curses of Moses, Moshe. His real name is Moshe, as in Moshe Dayan, whose books I read, and I read all of Menachem Begin's books and a few others of the Irgun and the other terrorist organizations who are devoted to extirpating the Palestinians from the land of the Jews as they perceive it. So that is the situation in which we find ourselves as scientists on this earth, trying to deal with the irrationality of the world. If you want my opinion on how you can reconcile your religious views, which you should keep to yourself and out of science, but as a human you cannot overlook it, you cannot deny your religious side, what you can do is make a rigorous distinction between what would have been the outcome if the Creator had gotten his way, compared with what actually happened when the Creator did not get his way. Whatever you extrapolate from that is up to you. I suppose you can guess what my opinion is on that. The Creator cannot be thwarted. That's also in the Bible, in case you care to read it at any time. And it even has a book at the end that describes what is about to happen, and in fact the events leading up to the horrific situation here on Earth. I have given a series of presentations on the book of Revelation, which will fill you in on those details if you're interested. I am an accredited Bible scholar. I bill myself, or used to, as the foremost Bible scholar on the earth. I believe that that is well substantiated, although I don't have a full knowledge of other men who may know as much or even more than I do. I strongly suspect, and I have very good reasons for suspecting, that those men do exist, but none of them exist in what's called organized Christianity. If they exist anywhere, and again I believe they do exist, they're in the Islam nations. The Islam nation is definitely approved by God as the replacement for Israel. So whatever the Israelis say about their inevitable domination of the earth, it is not according to the Creator's wishes, and therefore they will be stopped. They cannot be stopped at this time for reasons only the Creator knows. And if any of that does not set well with you, that's perfectly fine. You do not need to agree with me or with any man who attempts to expound these difficult subjects. I'm merely giving you options which no one else will give you. You are not only entitled to your religious opinions, you must heed them. But beware that no man deceive you. And I'm merely quoting the words of the Master. Now what we're going to do today is begin at the beginning of science, how science actually began, without actually knowing its ultimate origin, except in the sense that we've been able to discern from scientific investigations in biology. We do have a mind. This is a statistical view now of humans as a group. We each have a consciousness that has a logic system. None of the animals or any part of the ecology has such a mind. Only human beings have this mind. And it has been proved that human beings are a separate creation. We were created with the ecology when the ecology was created. It can be shown that the origin of the ecology in the solar system, which would be on Earth obviously, was engineered. It had to have been engineered because of the incredible complexity of the system. Amazing balances, both chemical balances, it goes all the way to cosmic proportion, because the Earth is completely reliant on the sun for its energy system. This powers the vegetable kingdom, the plants, who produce the oxygen for the animals, and I think you know a lot of the rest from general biological logic. So none of that could be by accident. The whole presumption of the natural selection system is a projection of the group mind of man, who capitalized on the insights of Charles Darwin, who himself did not believe his own theory. He knew it was wrong. He was simply pointing out that's the best that science could do at the time. Indeed, I consider Charles Darwin to have been I won't say perfectly reputable, because that's difficult to say, but reasonably reputable scientist who produced a reasonable theory of genetic diversification. He had no way of knowing that he could not be right. And it was only in the middle of the 20th century, with the discovery of DNA, that it was finally determined that natural selection is completely untenable. Now, you may be persuaded by the presence of a large group of educated men who say that, of course, natural selection is the beginning point of biology, and anybody who does not accept natural selection simply cannot be considered a rational man. You're perfectly free to accept that if you wish, but you will never be a scientist, and you will never actually be rational. It's a completely irrational theory, as has been conclusively proved. It's very difficult to credit that, though, having been raised in the system, for instance, in the United States, where the whole premise, certainly since, let's just say in the 20th century, that the whole idea of a creation which is logical was denied in favor of a mechanistic approach to the emergence of human consciousness. That is completely ridiculous. There could be no such thing as consciousness or a mind, or indeed anything that pertains to the definition of a human. It had to be from a design, for the same reason that the ecology was designed. It could not have made itself. That's anti-scientific. All of which is to say that the pursuit of science is part of the plan. So you are blessed if you're pursuing rational logic. And I've gone to extraordinary pains in my 560 lectures over the past 3 years. I have pointed out over and over again, and will continue to point out for anyone willing to listen to reason, that you definitely know that you were created by a superconscious, superintelligent being who has a consciousness and has a mind and is capable of not only knowing what science is, but that being invented the concept of rational logic and science with its deductive system, enabling us to achieve solutions to our questions. Well, you have to ask yourself, what is your question? In science, you have to be extraordinarily precise in what it is that you're trying to prove. So I hope I've bracketed our approach well enough for you to know that this has direct application to any question a human being may ask about death, afterlife, anything that was here before us. All of that is a perfectly rational way of looking at the universe. But beyond that, it's very difficult to get the characteristics of the Creator in the sense of personal guidance. For that, you need to go to the blueprint, because we were put here, obviously, for a reason. Well, it's very difficult to figure out what that reason is. And so you do have that problem that you have to solve yourself. My job is to give you all the tools so that you'll be able to make rational decisions, which ultimately come down to aspects of the question and the situation that only you can face, and you have to face it alone. Nobody can reach in to help you, only by giving you tools, not by giving you answers. They're called transcendental questions, okay? That's the right word for it. Our approach now is to accept the fact that the blueprint of the Creator includes the directive to turn on your rational mind and to prefer it in order to get orientation for your life. Your orientation must be rational. We're communicative creatures. We're communal creatures. We form a system together which is provably and proven to be beneficial for all men when we pool our minds together for rational ends. I've already told you that that will become corrupt after at least, or just approximately one generation, two at the most. The men who originally got together to pool their minds die, and there's no guarantee that their successors are going to be immune to the wiles of irrational strategies, such as for governments and warfare. That's right out. You want nothing to do with that. You actually want nothing to do with governments at all. Now, the problem that that poses for scientists, people who are rational and moral, they have moral scope. They're not looking to dominate other people or judge other people in any practical way. Those men are faced with a quandary because we're reared in a system that's already corrupt. That's why we have natural selection. That's why natural selection has never been revoked. The same is also true of other models. I'll just name two to give you some examples. The model of natural selection is obviously wrong, and you must accept that or you will never be, you can't go on. You have to acknowledge that natural selection is just completely anti-scientific. It'll lead you in the wrong direction. But so will the current cosmological theory, which is based on a perception of the universe which is, I'll just say, incorrect. It is now considered to have been proved in the model of the cosmological model, that is our current official group mind perception of what the universe is. It is expanding. It is expanding. That is not true. And in this series, I'll show you exactly why it's not true. Essentially, it's because of the redshift of cosmic light, that is, at cosmic distances from galaxies. The stars in the galaxies give us their distance from the redshift. One of the most amazing discoveries in the history of astronomy is the current, penultimate rung on the cosmic distance ladder. That was a very difficult, arduous fish ladder sequence of getting the distance to the nearest planet, then to the nearest star, and from there to the nearest galaxy. That's leaving out a lot of steps, but currently we know of a certainty that the redshift indicates distance on a linear scale. That's very important. Well, distances are linear, so it's really redundant to put it that way, but it's not redundant to emphasize that it is linear. And in the last episode, I left you with the question, first of all, what is light speed? And you now know, as you should, it's a reasonable thing to say, that light speed is a two-component number. It has to be because it's speed, and speed is distance over time. That's space over time. The metric of space and the metric of time were dovetailed together with a new linear system invented by Einstein, which extends the 3D cubic grid to a 4D hypercubic grid. The reason it's called a hyperbolic is that calculus is used to extract curvature from the linear grid, which now includes an imaginary component which is labeled time, and therefore Einstein made time a linear component in a linear system. That is inaccurate. And that's where we begin today. The question that I left you with, after asking the leading question, what is light speed? To say that it's a two-component number is the mathematically correct answer to a certain threshold. In other words, it's an excellent beginning. It is a two-component number, and light speed is not just distance, and it's not just event separation. It's both at the same, in the same geometry. So the second question that I asked you is more important because we're drilling down to the geometric aspect. I deal exclusively in geometry, and the reason I do that is the only way to approach the universe. If you are trained to approach the universe on a mathematical basis, then you are open to deception because numbers are extremely easy to manipulate, and then due to the nature of modeling, to accept premises that are thought to have been proved in order to build on those premises when actually they were not proved. That is the case in the matter of cosmological expansion. Redshift does have a similarity to Doppler shift, which is a sound phenomenon occurring in a physical medium. However, light propagation does not occur only in media such as water and glass. It also propagates through empty space. The fact that it does so, and that it does so in a way that we can compute rationally, leads us to a possible mathematical solution for the propagation of light in space. Because light propagates spherically and not linearly, when we get a distance to a star from light, we're taking a derivative. Every linear computation, which is all computations done in science, these are linear computations, and the distance to a star is a linear computation, which means it's a derivative. And that is, I can say that staunchly, knowing that I'm right and that I can prove it to you. That is science. It's not what I say, it's what I can prove. I proved in 2022 that our linear system is a pure derivative system. That actually is somewhat obvious, but it's never been obvious enough to enter mainstream science, which to this day does not know how to handle curvature, which means science to this day is in the same position that the Greeks found themselves in, that the circle is irrational with respect to the line, and so is the sphere. Now in the 20th century, approximately, these are bracketing time frames. In the 20th century, science itself came face to face with the sphere at all levels. The atom was discovered, and the universe was discovered. There's an excellent book by that title, The Day We Found the Universe, by Marcia Bartusiak. Highly recommendable reading, and it's an extraordinarily entertaining read. And entertainment is a big part of science. Don't ever forget that. We're in this for fun. This isn't to hurt us. This is to answer our questions. This is the right way to get the answers to the questions you need answered in your own life. You must use logic. Otherwise, you're prey to everything around you. Your environment, your educational system, your religious system, the philosophies that are rampant. Just pure guesswork. You don't want to ever indulge in that, except in the privacy of your own mind. It's not part of science. And there's a footnote to that, which I've already attempted to expose you to. A lot of what we're doing is superpositional, and that's something else that was discovered as we discovered the other spherical aspect of the universe, which is at the center. Now here's where I want to begin today, because this will complete our brief history of line. I hope I've convinced you that everything in science is linear. That is a fact. It's not commonly admitted. There are reasons, although based in an irrational reference frame, there are reasons for denying the fact that all science is based on linear logic, linear geometry, and linear numbers. Because science confronted the sphere. In the discovery of the atom, we discovered the atom is a spherical system. We then discovered the two particles that make up the atom, both of which are spheric phenomena. Very interesting. I've covered that in extraordinary detail, but we're going to cover it again more cogently, more concisely. This is the nature of science, to continually summarize in order to achieve a goal, a solution. What are we looking for in science? Two things. We're looking for the nature of the universe at macro scale. When you say the universe, you're referring to an object in the most abstract sense. It's the largest object. That's why it's uni. It's one thing. The immediate difficulty we face in that is that it has no perceivable edge. The James Webb Telescope has simply confirmed what the Hubble telescope confirmed before, and which is common knowledge, is we cannot find the edge of the universe. Now this is actually involving our minds in a circular argument which baffles us. I've solved that, and we're leading up to that. The rationalization of infinity. So that's cosmology. Just to sum up, just so you know where I'm going with this, so you know my frame of reference, the easy mistake to make when trying to compute the universe, as of course our cosmologists are always trying to do. That is a legitimate pursuit. But because of the limitations of our mathematical system, we're forced to make a grid. Now, if you put the grid over the universe and then retract it back to its origin, assuming that it has been expanding, you can then reverse that logically back to its origin. Now, with the linear system, that means the origin is at zero. Well, that's actually a mistake. Because what that would mean is that the universe came from nothing. No matter how you do that, if you begin with the notion that the universe is expanding, you're going to have the same problem when you retract it back to its origin. Even disregarding the nature of the singularity, which is the zero center of the bullseye, that in itself is not the heart of the problem in extrapolating the origin of the universe. You cannot extrapolate the origin of an infinitely unbounded system because you don't know where it ends, so you can't withdraw it back to its source because there's nothing to pull. So where did cosmologists come up with this idea that the universe is expanding? It's due to the nature of light, in the way it propagates in space. Light expands. As it propagates, it expands spherically on a spherical surface. That's been known since the time of Christian Huygens. Now that entailed a controversy which has never been directly addressed. Newton disagreed. He did not understand what Christian Huygens really was saying. And so he extrapolated in his own mind a considerably reasonable solution, I would have to say in retrospect, that photons are particles. He called them corpuscles. Well, Einstein came along and at the beginning of the 20th century gave a firm foundation to that perception because he was able to show through the photoelectric effect that light must be particles when they transition. But I think you can tell from the formulation of my careful formulation of that statement that it's only during transition that they can be considered to be particles. Max Planck is the one that gave Einstein that idea that light could be quantized. It does quantize at the transition because when light re-engages matter, it does so through the atomic system, which means it's reabsorbed by electrons. So electrons and photons are closely related. But the electron itself, although it is considered to be a particle, although you need to know my formulation of it to know it's not exactly... There are two particles. There's the proton and the electron. Those make the atom. But the proton makes a center. It makes a gravitational center, and it is gravity. It has to be, and that's been proved. Well, I proved it. But I believe it's just a matter of syntax. In the grand unification theory, as it was originally proposed, and Einstein pursued this to the end of his days, when he was done with relativity and his investigation of the photoelectric effect, for which he got the Nobel Prize, but not for relativity. That's strange, but it's due to the whim of Stockholm, to whom they give prizes. There's no real pure logic behind their prizes. Einstein was interested in unifying electrodynamics with gravity, of course. Well, it's pretty obvious to see what the relationship is. The relationship is centripetal force, one of the two forces that balance the universe. The other one is centrifugal force. This comes full circle now, so we can now geometrically answer my question, my second question, the first one having been mathematical. What kind of a number is light speed? It's a two-component number. That's good enough. That's a good answer. The second question then is, what direction does light propagate in? It propagates centrifugally. It's a result of force. In fact, you could say that it is the force in motion. So it's pure energy. That's already known. Light is pure energy. That leaves the proton being the opposite of that, essentially, because it doesn't appear to be pure energy. It can be shown that it is a manifestation of energy. That is, the proton is also pure energy. E equals mc squared essentially proves that. Now, to answer the question of which direction light propagates in, the correct answer is, you could say it one of two ways. It propagates spherically, not linearly. A photon, if it were a linear phenomenon, would go directly from the atom of the star to your telescope. That's impossible. Absolutely impossible. So I want to give you, in closure here, we're coming up on an hour, I want to give you an insight into the propagation of light, which addresses the quantum mechanical paradox. And in the next episode, we're actually going to unravel the quantum paradox, find its geometric basis, and visualize it so that it is fully understood. That has never been done, but I have done it. The way to approach that so that you'll be prepared for the next presentation: consider the light that comes from a distant star in a galaxy, I'll put it that way, and it appears to go on a direct line. That's how we get the distance, is on a direct line from the atom in the star, or you could say all the atoms in the star producing the light that arrive at your telescope. Those photons, if that's what they are, arrive on a straight line, which is impossible. So what's the solution to that paradox? This is the quantum paradox, by the way, in one of its many, many manifestations. But I consider this to be the actual heart of the issue, certainly from my own perspective, since I got the answer that I needed. How does light propagate to get to us from deep space? It cannot be linearly, but it can be shown that it has a linear aspect. Otherwise, we would not have distances to the stars based on the redshift. But that relationship is linear. Now, what I have discovered is that is true, but it's derivative. So what is actually happening at a higher order is invisible. It has not been directly perceived through our mathematics. And in fact, it's impossible to perceive it with our current mathematical system because it's linear. However, I have proved that the linear system itself is the derivative number system of the proportional number system, which was actually used by the Greeks. And a proportional number system is easily defined. It's a fraction. A fraction. 2 over 1 can be reduced directly to a linear number, 2. But 2 over 1 is in a different form. It's a two-component form, just like light speed. So there's a match. Let's pursue that. What if you invert the numbers? 1 over 2. Well, we know what that is, do we? Can you state the relationship between 2 over 1 and 1 over 2? Try multiplying them. What's the relationship between plus 1 and negative 1? You know. They add to 0. Well, that's the nature of the linear system, because the Archimedean of the system, the center, the bullseye, the balance point, and it is a point according to Euclid, and he got that right. It's a dimensionless point, it has to be, in order to be what it is, which is the center number for a linear metric from 0 to 1. You can extend that. Now you have the distance from 0 to 1, that is the metric. It's a linear separation. It's a linear spatial separation. That's all we're able to measure. All right. Now what about the propagation of light? It has a linear aspect, doesn't it? Well, yes, that's been proved by redshift. So it does have a linear aspect, but is that how it propagates? No. So is it propagating as a photon? Here is the right answer. And we're going to close with this insight, and I hope you enjoy this. I hope that it entertains you in a productive way, because it is the truth. This can be proved. And so I'm going to state to you what the photon actually is. When a packet of energy detaches from an electron, we call it a photon, right? That's Einstein's definition. It's also Newton's definition. But is that what it is? It's superpositional, which means that you can say that it is because it is. But here's the paradox. That's not all it is. So what else is it? It's a superpositional entanglement. And here's what that means. When the packet of energy detaches from an electron, it is no longer bound to its spatial coordinate system. It's in free fall. It free falls out from its origin. So it detaches from the electronic system, and the answer to the question, which way does it go? Which direction does it go? It goes out. Well, according to Emmy Noether, we can give a definition to that direction, because it's one of the two balancing forces in a symmetrically composed energic universe. Where gravity is pulling in, that's the proton, but the electron is pushing out. It's bound. In the same way, only in a very curious inversion, the proton is obviously bound. It has a center. The electron has a center of a different type. And it has to do with the force balance between the electron and the proton, and it also has to do with the force balance internal to the proton which is essentially centripetal, but Ruger Josef Bošković proved that it's actually a balance of two forces. I have proved that that is also true of the electron, that even though it's a centrifugal force manifestation in space, that it also has a centripetal component that holds it together. The proton bends space, but in order to do so, it has to exert a centrifugal force to create itself as a force field. This is the force field of the proton. The electron has a force field also, but it's oriented in the opposite chiral direction. There are only two of those directions, out from a center and in towards the center. If you would, that is the unification solution that Einstein sought. For some strange reason, which I won't go into, that has been overlooked. The easiest way to say why that's been overlooked is because the mathematicians rely fully on their mathematical presumptions, that is, their premises, which are ill-formulated. And I've gone into that in such extraordinary detail, I won't attempt to summarize it now, but here is the solution to the quantum paradox for light propagation in free space. When the so-called photon, which we'll just call an energy packet, that is known. It is a manifestation of energy that's in free fall going out. As it goes out, it is one particle. It has to be because it's a packet of energy. That's why it has a frequency and a wavelength. So it is a thing. But when it's in free flight, it's in a state that cannot be computed with linear mathematics. The way that that has been analyzed is inadequate, and that's why there's still a paradox. The solution to that paradox is to understand the nature of the particle that's in free flight. It cannot be called a particle unless you redefine the word particle. In fact, it is a particle that is a spheric surface. So it's a gigantic expanding particle. Now here's where it gets spooky, because when it arrives at the telescope, I'll just say it that way, or it could be your eye, it manifests as just a particle in a locality, whereas when it's in flight, it does not have locality. It's a spheric surface, so its locality is actually that surface. It's the entire surface. So that leads to what appears to be a transluminal transgression, that when it manifests, that is when it transitions back to an electronic shell, that's how a photon is captured, it is said that the wavefront collapses. That is one way of saying it, but that's linear thinking. The right way to see it, and I'll train you to see this way, but this is your introduction to correct seeing, that particle still has to be a particle. Otherwise, when it arrives, it cannot be a particle. It would have to defy light speed, which of course it cannot do. So what actually happens is, as the packet of energy expands, it is a particle that is completely distributed on the sphere, that is expanding. This is actually where we get the notion of expansion of space. It's the misinterpretation of redshift as expansion of the universe. That is expansion of space. It's not the expansion of space. It's the expansion of the particle. Now the strange thing is, and this is the nature of superposition, that particle is everywhere on the surface at once. And the way to explain that is with the other half of the paradox, which is that particle is entangled with itself. So it is that particle everywhere. And everywhere it is on the surface of that sphere, it is that particle. You could say all at the same time, but you'll confuse yourself if you say it that way. It confused Einstein. But that is the correct answer. It's a superpositionally entangled particle. It's a superpositionally entangled packet of energy that has a wavelength and a frequency, and that's 1 hour. I hope you enjoyed this. I did.
And I've been trying to say that for a long time, and I hope I said it well.
I'll say it better the next time. But we have a long way to go. The list of discoveries that I've made about the electron, the proton, and the photon are so far-reaching that words can't describe it. I'm going to have to find those words, because that's science. The ability to communicate truth so that you know it because it's the universe saying it, not a man. That's also superpositional. It's the superposition of a human consciousness with superconsciousness. And that's why scientists are rightly feared. And you should fear that. Never fear the man. Fear the superconsciousness behind it. Okay? That's called the fear of God. Alright? Not me. You have nothing to fear from me. I won't be long for this world. I'm leaving. So will you. Your time will come too. Be sure that you're ready. This is the way to be ready, so that you're pleasing when you arrive. You don't like that? Come up with a better idea. We're simply being logical here. I hope you agree that's pretty logical. So that's the nature of light propagation. There's much, much, much more to be said. We'll get into the mathematics of it. I'll show you how the quantum paradox is no longer a paradox. I think you understand how entanglement works. And in the next presentation, I think you're going to be very pleased with what you come to know, for sure. No more guessing. There is a mysterious aspect. We're going to understand the mystery. That's the whole idea of fun. The most fun a man can have is the fun that your Creator wants you to have, because it pleases Him too. Isn't that nice to know that your fun is approved by the one who invented it? Beats pornography. We'll be right back. Keep looking up.